I've been a police officer for a while now. I will tell you the experience that I have so far that creeps me out the most. This was when I was pretty new to being an officer. I was on patrol and driving the pretty standard police car. It was late at night and probably about 11 p.m. There was a call for a noise complaint that I was going to investigate. To me, it seemed like not that big of a deal, but you never know what can happen. So it was just me going to the scene. No other officers were there or going to go there. I drove to the address and the neighborhood was pretty quiet, but average for the most part. I guess I would say that the houses were a little more spread out here with larger yards. There was also a good amount of trees in the area. And on this particular street, many of the houses had large woods bordering the ends of their backyards. This was part of a nearby park and golf course, and overall just more wild area. This street was kind of the last one in the neighborhood before the more wild land. So anyways, I parked my car on the side of the road in front of the address. Then I walked up the sidewalk and up the driveway. The house in question looked old and it looked like nobody was home. I observed that all the windows were covered by shades and all the lights in the house appeared to be off as well. The grass in the front yard was overgrown and there were no cars in the driveway. Overall, the entire property was in rough shape. I wasn't hearing any noise though, so I walked up to the front door and tried ringing the doorbell. I heard nothing at all. After a little while, I knocked on the door, but there was still nothing. I waited about a minute and looked around. The whole neighborhood was very quiet. I looked at the house number and I was definitely at the right address. I knocked one more time and announced myself. There was still nothing. As I was standing there on the front step and looking around, I saw a neighbor. A car drove down the street and pulled into the driveway next door. I left the front step and started walking over to them. The neighbor parked in the driveway of their house and then left the car. It was a woman and I waved to her and then walked over. I asked her if she knew the neighbors next door at all and I pointed to the house. She told me that nobody lived there and that the house had been abandoned for a while. This surprised me to hear that, but it also didn't surprise me that much given the condition of the property. I asked her if anybody ever went there or if she heard loud noises. She said no and she wasn't aware of anybody ever being there. I told her to have a good night and then I walked back over to the house feeling confused. I was going to knock one more time and then I guess leave, because there didn't seem to be anybody there and there wasn't any noise going on that I heard. When I got back over to the front step, I was approaching it and I was sure that I heard somebody inside. It was the sound of somebody moving away from the front of the house and walking towards the back of it. The footsteps were easy to hear because of how quiet it was. After hearing this, I knocked on the door again and announced myself. I really thought that they would answer that time. I knew someone was in there, but still, there was nothing. I stood there for about another minute and then I left the front step, but I did not leave. Instead, I walked around to the side of the house and then the backyard. I was wondering if maybe there was a more common door used, such as one at the side, and I was also curious to see if there were any signs of people in the backyard or other places on the property. Possibly there would be sign of forced entry if the house was in fact vacant and somebody had broken in. It was very dark back there. I walked around but didn't see anything out of the normal. It was very overgrown back there as well, and so that didn't help much. I spent maybe 5 minutes walking the property and then went back around. When I got towards the front of the house again, I heard a loud noise. It sounded like something being smashed, almost like somebody was taking a baseball bat to the kitchen and just smashing stuff. It was very loud. I couldn't see in the windows and obviously did not know what it was, but I now knew what the noise complaint had probably been about. I walked back over to the front step quickly and then I banged on the front door. The loud noises had gone on for maybe 30 seconds. As soon as I knocked on the door though, they abruptly stopped. Once more, nobody came to the door and the house became silent again. As I was standing there on the step, I suddenly heard the back door to the house open. When it did, I instantly left the step and ran around the house. I got into the backyard and saw a man standing at the backside of the yard. I yelled at him to stop, but he didn't even turn back and look at me. He was not running, but walking rather quickly and heading straight for the woods. I ran after him as the guy entered the thick forest. I couldn't make out much about him because I really only saw his backside. By the time I reached the woods, he had been in there for a good 30 seconds. It was really overgrown back there and also very hard to see. Using my flashlight, I walked around in the woods looking for the man. I called out for him multiple times, and I sort of heard noises in the distance for a while, and I walked towards them, but soon things were quiet again. I looked around the woods for a good 10 minutes, but could not find the guy. Then I went back to the house. I called in what happened on the radio, and another officer in the area joined me on the scene. The back door to the house was wide open, and the house was confirmed to be vacant as well. Inside the house, it looked like things had been smashed with a bat, but nobody else was in there. We looked around more, but never found the man. Something about that night just really creeped me out, and I still remember it like it was yesterday. Maybe that's because it was my first time dealing with a situation where things went kind of unexpected. I'm really not sure what was going on there. I think the guy inside thought that I had left when I went in the backyard, and that's why he was smashing stuff again. Why he was smashing stuff at all, though, I don't know, and why he was even in the house, I also don't know, because the property was vacant. But when he left, he just kind of disappeared in the woods, and that was really strange. Overall, it was a crazy experience. This happened back when I was in high school, but it's something that I will never forget. I was home alone for the weekend. My parents went out of town for a work conference, and they both worked at the same company. This happened a few times a year, and it was always fun for me, because when I was home alone, I would just eat pizza and play video games and stay up late. It was cool to have that kind of independence in high school, and my older brother was in college, so it was cool to have the whole place to myself. Our neighborhood was pretty nice. We were not super rich or anything, but overall it was one of the nicer neighborhoods in our city. So I remember on Friday night with my parents out of town, I had been hanging out around the house just playing video games and stuff after I had got back from school. I was planning to just stay up until I got too tired to stay awake anymore, and it would probably be about 1 a.m. or so. I remember that at around 10 o'clock at night, there was a knock at the front door to the house. I went over to a front window to look out of it before answering the door to see who was there. Even though I was experienced in being home alone, it was still always a little creepy at night, or if somebody was at the door. We didn't really get many people at the door, especially late at night. After looking out the window, I saw a cop standing on the front step. Surprisingly to me, right after I noticed him, he looked over and noticed me in the window. He smiled and waved at me in a friendly way. Seeing now that it was a cop, I figured I better answer the door for him. And he seemed cheerful, so I didn't think it was anything bad. I went over to the door and opened it. The policeman said hi and sorry to bother me so late at night. He was nice, but something about him seemed a little off. I didn't know what it was, if it was his uniform or something like that, or how he was talking or what. But after I said hi, he told me that he was looking for a suspect in the area. He said that he didn't want to scare me, but he had reason to believe that the suspect might be hiding out in the area, possibly in someone's backyard. Then he asked me if I had seen or heard anything strange, and I said no because I hadn't. He then asked me if my parents or anybody else was home, and I said no. Obviously, I wasn't going to lie to a cop. So he then told me that I was probably not in any danger, but he just wanted to look around in our backyard. I said that it was okay, and then he left. The whole thing seemed a little weird, but overall, I didn't think too much of it. I was sort of creeped out that there was a suspect in the area, but if a cop was here looking for him, I felt safer about it. So I just went back to my video games at that point. About 20 minutes later, there was another knock on the front door. I went there and saw that the cop was back. I opened the door and he told me that he was working with other law enforcement and the FBI or something like that. I don't remember the exact words he used, but that was basically what he was saying. Something along those lines. He then said that they had an investigation going. He told me to go and leave the back door unlocked and to stay away from that area of the house. I must have had a confused look on my face at that point. The cop then said that he couldn't get into any details but to trust him, and the matter would be resolved by the morning, and that I was probably safe. I said okay, and then I went in the house and unlocked the back door. Then I went back over to the cop and told him that I did. He said that he would be in touch, and then he left. After that, I was super confused. I was trying to think of why I would have to unlock the back door. Did the cops want to use my house as a hideout or something? I had no idea, but I stayed away from that part of the house like I was instructed. Then I went back to playing video games for probably an hour or so. But the whole time, I was feeling more and more creeped out. I didn't feel safe going to sleep. I was paranoid that the criminal guy might get in the back door of the house that was now unlocked. I looked out a window into the backyard, but there was nothing. No cops, nobody at all. I knew that I wouldn't get any sleep, and it was now almost midnight, so I decided to call the local police department. I wanted to get more information or an update of if the guy was caught. Maybe they had found the guy and I wasn't in any danger at all. So I called the police and explained the situation. I was met with confusion at first, but I was soon told that there was no police officer investigating anything in the area and that the guy I encountered sounded like a fake cop. There was no suspect in the area either. They told me to lock the door and said that they would send a real officer to my house. So I quickly ran down and locked the back door to the house. Then I waited. When the real officer got there, he was way different than the other guy. From the way he talked to how his uniform looked, it was way more professional, and I realized that the other guy was definitely a fake. The real cops looked around for the guy for a while, but they couldn't find him. Then they left. After that, the fake cop never returned. I was a little scared for the rest of the weekend, but nothing else happened. Looking back, it was a crazy situation. I think the fake cop was planning to break into our house or something. He probably was going to wait until later that night when I was maybe asleep. I also think that he was nearby in the area and he must have seen the real cops there, and that's why he never returned. Either that or possibly he did try to enter the house, but the door was locked, so he went away. I also think he might have been working with someone else. Either way, he was a fake, and I'm glad that I called the real police about the situation. This is something that happened a long time ago. I worked as a police officer for a few years when I was younger. It's a job that I will never forget and can be very intense at times. It's not for everyone, and it wasn't for me. Overall, it was too stressful for me to do for more than a few years, and so I ended up choosing to change careers. I'm feeling much better now in the career that I currently have. Nothing really that crazy happened in my time as a cop, but I had some friends deal with some really crazy situations. I certainly have a lot of respect for all the officers out there, but one memory in my short time in law enforcement stands out as the most strange thing that ever happened. I worked in a small town. It was way out there and in the country, and normally very quiet. Not a whole lot happened typically in the area that I patrolled. Mostly it would be speeding cars and other traffic violations, occasionally other calls and a little bit of everything, but I'd spend much of my time patrolling the roads. I also worked a lot of night shifts, and so the roads would be very quiet generally. On one night, it was very late. I don't recall exactly when, but the roads were dead. It had been dark out for hours, and the road that I was on had no streetlights. Most of them didn't in that area. There would maybe be one here and there. I was just driving down one road surrounded by woods and coming up to an intersection. When I got to the stop sign, I was headed north, and I saw a car going towards the west who was also approaching the intersection. As I came to the four-way stop, I saw the car not slow down at all and completely blow through the stop sign. It was a silver four-door sedan and the windows were very tinted. But also what stood out to me was that the headlights were completely off. I'm not even sure how this car was seeing the roads, because there was like nobody else out there at all. Almost immediately I turned on my lights and I took a left to conduct a traffic stop on the silver car. There were two obvious violations, possibly more. Running a stop sign, not having lights on, and maybe even windows that were too tinted. When I turned left, I sped up to catch up to the car. It was not speeding at least. The speed limit was 55, and the car was probably going about 50. I quickly caught up to it, and the car was almost hard to see in the dark because of it having no lights on at all. However, the car did not pull over. I then noticed that the car also didn't have any back plates on it. Another violation. A wave of adrenaline started to hit me, and I felt myself getting a little bit nervous. It seemed like the car was not going to pull over. As I continued driving right behind the car, we went for another 30 seconds or so, and they still didn't pull over. I turned on my siren to make it more obvious that I was there. There was no way that this person did not know that I was behind them trying to pull them over. But still, they did not move to the side of the road. They just continued driving. They started going faster though, and then suddenly the car made a right down a more quiet and narrow road. I took the right as well, and I radioed in that I was trying to perform a traffic stop and the vehicle was not pulling over. I informed dispatch where I was for possible backup. But in the town where I worked, it was sprawling and very rural, so it would take a little while for anybody else to get there. The car still did not pull over. They drove down the quiet road and then took a sudden left. It was clear that they were trying to lose me. I kept following the best I could. The car soon took this really narrow dirt road. I had never been on this road before and it was very winding. The trees were growing very close to the road, and we drove down here for a little while, and I continued to try to pull the car over and relay information about what was happening on the radio. As we kept going, I thought about trying to perform a pit maneuver, but I couldn't get to the car and the road was too narrow. The car then turned on another dirt road very quickly and at the last moment. I almost didn't make the turn and I had to slow down. I saw another road shortly after the one that the car took. As I made my way onto that road, I lost a little bit of ground, but I saw where the car went. It turned on another road and was briefly out of my sight. I quickly drove down that road and turned to the one that the car was on. I was just on time to see the car making another turn on a street up ahead. Somehow the car seemed to be navigating these streets insanely well. I sped up and then made the next turn. I saw the car far up the road. As I went faster, the car quickly turned again. I turned onto the next road and noticed that the car was turning once more. This road was another dirt road surrounded by woods. I honestly had no clue where I was anymore. I drove down that road trying to catch up to the car after it had turned again, but when I turned to the next road where I thought that the car went, it was gone. It just wasn't there. I went up and looked for more roads or a secret driveway, but I didn't see anything. I went straight, looking left, right, and forward. I couldn't find the car at all. Its lights had been off, so that gave it a huge advantage, but still, I could not believe that it was gone. I radioed in that I might have lost it. Within 5 minutes, I had help from several more police cars. We all drove the area searching for the next hour or so. We didn't find the car at all. I was left extremely confused. I have no idea how the car got away from me. After that, for the rest of my shift, I was wondering about it. We were not able to locate the car or find out who was driving it. To this day, I don't know. Whoever it was, though, really knew how to drive well. I think the car was also modified and handled really good. Maybe it was somebody who runs from the cops as a sport or kind of a hobby. I also don't know how they saw so well with no lights, but that one's still a mystery to me. A few years ago, I lived in an apartment by myself. I worked a job that I no longer have, but for the job I would work all kinds of odd hours. It really messed up my sleep schedule, so I'm glad that I no longer work there. But one thing that I would do a lot in that time period is go on walks late at night, or all kinds of weird hours really. I would also sometimes walk in the early hours of the morning. Near my apartment there was this really long walking trail. It went from the apartment complex to a park nearby, and a large part of the path went through the woods. In that area, the woods was massive and it was also very dense. It was common to see animals such as deer or sometimes fox or even coyotes near the path. I know that walking on the path in the woods seems creepy at night, and it is, but I really wasn't that scared. I would walk the trail during the day too, but with my sleep schedule messed up, I'd go a lot at night. It would usually help me to be able to sleep when I would get back, and so that was part of why I would go. It was relaxing, and being outside in the fresh air also made me more relaxed when I got back home. And as you could guess, when I walked at night, I would never see anybody. The trail was quiet as it was, but during the nighttime there would never be anyone. Sometimes outside closer to the apartment complex here and there, I might see people taking their dogs out or something. But once I got into the woods, there was never anyone. I remember up until the night of this story, the scariest experience I had in the woods was when I came across a couple of deer. I heard a noise in the woods and it spooked me, but when I saw the deer, they crossed the path and I just kept going. So on this night, I went out at about 2 a.m. I had recently returned home from work, and it was a nice but cool evening. I wanted to get some fresh air and exercise and then go back and go to bed. When I got out there that night, things were quiet like usual. I didn't see anyone. I got into the woods and walked pretty far. I was maybe 20 minutes out there on the trail and like right in the middle of the thick forest. As I was walking, suddenly I noticed up ahead blue and red flashing police lights. They looked like they were coming from up the trail and right in the middle of the woods. They were to my left, and I thought that it was really strange, but it was hard to tell exactly where the lights were coming from because of how dark it was out there. I was confused nevertheless. I thought that maybe it was coming from a street in the distance behind the woods, and I was just seeing it through the woods. But the more I walked and the closer I got, it looked a lot more like the lights were coming from right in the middle of the forest off the trail. There were really no other paths going off trail, so this was strange. I kept going, and soon got as close as I could on trail to the lights. I looked at them, and they were definitely in the woods. I didn't really hear anything though, nobody talking or moving through the woods. I kept watching the lights, trying to make sense of them. Then I decided to take a few steps off the trail and into the forest to investigate. However, as I started to go off trail, the lights suddenly turned off. It was really strange. I now hardly saw anything in the dark. For some reason, I called out asking if anybody was there. Looking back, I don't know why I did that, but nevertheless, when I did, I got no response. I heard nothing at all. So at that point, I was feeling kind of creeped out and decided to head back. I walked back on the trail to my apartment. The whole time, I was looking over my shoulder every so often to see if the lights would return. They never did, and I went back home and then went to bed a short time later. I was confused about it, but overall forgot it pretty quickly. However, a few nights later, I went for a walk again pretty late. It was around the same time as before. I'm not sure if it was the same spot again, but overall I remember seeing police lights off the trail in the woods again. This was really weird. I was very curious as to what these were. I thought that maybe they were some kind of security lights. I was sure that there was some logical explanation, but I was just curious as to what it was. So when I got closer, once more, I went off the path. Not long into this, the lights all turned off again. It was like the same thing as before. I thought that it was really weird how they turned off as soon as I got into the woods, but I kept going this time. I didn't really hear anything, and I didn't say anything this time. I walked for about 2 or 3 minutes off the trail going to where I had seen the lights. It was pretty thick woods, but soon I reached a little clearing. I was sure that this is where the lights had been. I looked around and didn't see or hear anything strange at all. As I was looking around, I started to feel really creeped out. I asked if anybody was there, and I got no response. Then, as I was still in the clearing, I heard somebody moving in the woods behind me. It sounded like someone walking in the woods. They were farther in the woods and in the opposite direction of the path, and were heading towards me. I happened to be facing the opposite way towards the trail. When I heard whoever was there approaching, I just took off. I bolted for the woods and ran back for the trail. I didn't look to see who was there, and I was not chased, but I didn't stop running until I made it back on the trail. Then I jogged all the way back to my apartment. It was really strange, and I was super creeped out. The next day, I saw that there was a sign at the entrance of the woods, blocking the whole trail, that said that the trail was closed and to keep out. I had no idea why or what was going on there. Somebody was in the woods in the middle of the night, though. After like a week, the trail opened again. I did go down it a few more times and walk through the woods, but never again at night.